All right, everybody. Welcome to this session. It's coming on to about 11 o'clock. And normally, if I was getting ready to do a session 11 o'clock and we've been sitting around, I'd say, okay, everybody stand up and let's do some exercises just to get you kind of up and out and ready to go. But we've all been sitting on our things, and there we go. I see that Indie Design Week is doing that. And, you know, this is our new life. But it's got its ups and downs, and one of the reasons I can join you, and I'm so thrilled to be able to join Indie Design Week, and thank you to all the sponsors. After that little talk by Chris, I think I'm going to try to talk about a YouTube channel. Who knows? We can stretch ourselves. But today, what I'd like to share with you is talking about creating vibrant, sustainable communities and some of the lessons that I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years. What I'm going to do is tell this story a little bit through the lens of my own journey, and I'm kind of going to try to do it relatively quickly so that then we can open it up for some questions and perhaps explore some of the ideas that get raised here in a little bit more detail and let you guys direct the show. First of all, if we think about what is a vibrant and sustainable community, to me, it's a community that is basically what in the sustainability space we would call a triple bottom line community, right? One that is socially diverse and inclusive, one that is ecologically friendly, and one that is economically sound. But to be vibrant, I would also add, it's not just the triple bottom line of people, planet, and prosperity, but it's also a place of health, wellness, and beauty. And so to talk sort of a little bit about my story, until 4 years ago, I was basically a college professor. For the first 20 years of that, I was a professor of sociology, focused somewhat on urban studies. And then in the early 90s, began to talk about the relationship between its environment and society, recognize the importance of economy being part of that process, and found this interesting term that in the early 1990s, not many people are talking about, sustainability. And so I began to develop a whole new program at the university, Indiana University South Bend campus where I work, on sustainability studies. These days, you know, all of us, and quite frankly, most of the students would come into my classes now would know what sustainability is. But back in the 1990s, that's not where things were. But about 4 years ago, we had actually gotten the program in place with one of my graduate students, who is now the director of the program, Krista Bailey. And so I left the university thinking I was going to become a consultant in sustainability. But my path took a somewhat unexpected turn. And it all began with a single net zero house. You see, because during the course of my work at the Center for a Sustainable Future and developing that sustainability studies program at IU South Bend, I met a guy by the name of Dwayne Borkoler. And in 2008, when I was starting the Center for Sustainable Future, he was trying to figure out a new way to build houses that produce as much energy as they use. And he was a post and beam building supplier that is focusing largely on farm buildings, on assembly halls and churches. But he found that he could use his system to create homes that produce as much energy as they use for the same price as standard stick built. The challenge is that when you've got something that's new, and we're in 2008, the economy was roaring back, the builders didn't know how to build it, and they didn't know how need to learn. The bankers didn't know how to appraise it. The realtors didn't know how to sell it. And the contractors, you know, they weren't that interested in learning new ways to build. And nobody quite understood it. So what I sort of said to Dwayne is, I tell you what, Dwayne, let's just build one of these houses in my neighborhood on a vacant lot we've got here. And if you can't sell it, I'll buy it. I can certainly rent it out and make a return on investment. So I left the university thinking, well, I'm going to become a sustainability consultant, and I'm going to help Dwayne build one house in my neighborhood to begin to prove the concept of sustainable building. But then I met Kathy at the Local Cup. The Local Cup is a pay-it-forward coffee shop that's about 2 blocks from where I'm sitting right now in my neighborhood. And Kathy is the director of the Near Northwest Neighborhood Organization, which is a CDC, Community Development Corporation, that helps renovate and build housing, affordable housing in our neighborhood. And Kathy said, you know what, Mike, just across the street from us, we've got 3 vacant lots. Would you be interested in building on those? Well, this happened to be an area that I used to walk past all of the time as I would go to the coffee shop. And I always kind of thought in my mind, you know what? If we ever got something going on these vacant lots, we would have something happening in our neighborhood. It turned out this was a half a block that actually had 7 vacant lots on it, 3 of them owned by the NNN. And so I said, sure, Kathy, we'd love to do that. But now my challenge was, instead of building 1 net zero home that I probably was not going to be able to sell what it cost to build, I now had 3. And then we found out that the people who own the other 4 lots on the other side of this triangle was Habitat for Humanity. So we went and met with Habitat Humanity. And Habit said, well, you know, Mike, would you like to buy those lots from us? And I said, no, guys, I really would not. Because you know what? We've already got 3 vacant lots. We can't take on 4 more. But this is the deal. We'll teach you how to use our building system, and we'll give you a $25,000 discount on each of the packages. And you can use that to build Habitat for Humanity homes that produce as much energy as they use, so that your Habitat families will have the same high performance net zero housing that we're going to be trying to build in the market. And it just turned out that the Habitat not only agreed to do it that year, but in doing that, it turned out that that was the year that our county, St. Joseph County, got the Jimmy and Rosalind Cowder work project. The president and his wife would go around and visit various Habitat chapters each year. So we got to be part of that. Then I was sitting at that local cup, and just about around the corner from that Habitat development, and before it was really up, we had this beat up old, what had been a flower shop, and it had now been turned into kind of a flop house, probably a drug house, and a junk place. And the challenge is that when people talked about our neighborhood, the near Northwest neighborhood, they would go, ooh. And I'd say, no, this is a great neighborhood. It's a diverse neighborhood. We know each other. We're working together. We have lots of capacity. But they would go, ooh. And part of it was because we had buildings like this up and down the street. And so the guy who owned the house said, hey, Mike, we'll sell this to you for 20 grand. And I thought, okay, in order for us to make these Habitat houses and others that we want to build in our neighborhood attractive, we've got to begin to build the neighborhood, not just build some houses. So we took on this project. Actually, we did as good as we could with some sustainability elements. We wrapped it in something called 3HT, which is a great insulation board. We added more insulation, put in high efficiency furnaces, put in a metal roof. But then we had this next door. And so how am I going to get anybody to rent that building there if it's sitting next to that? And so the guy who owned that was using it for electronics storage. He had no water. He had no electricity going in. It was just junk. So we bought that from him and we fixed that up. And then the tax sales started. You see, in South Bend, we used to have a population of 135,000 people. And following World War II, basically that population with white flight and other sorts of deindustrialization, that population went down to just over 100,000. And so we found ourselves with a lot of vacant lots. And our mayor then, and you probably all know our mayor, Mayor Pete, who is currently the Secretary of Transportation, he's instituted a program called 1,000 Houses in 1,000 Days. And we had 1,000 vacant houses. And the idea was either to get them into other people's hands or to knock them down. They got about 330 of them into other people's houses, other people's hands. The other 680 or so were knocked down. And all of these little red lots you can see were tax sales. I work right in this area here, and this area used to kind of look like this area right in here. But what happened is these tax sales, the lots would sometimes sell for as little as $25, and then with about $700 worth of legal fees and other things, one could own them. And so we began to purchase these lots because in addition to these messed up buildings that we had to do. These lots were just being overgrown. They were being centers of trash. And so we began to pick some of those up and began to clean them up. So here I was, to make a long story short, I left the university in 2016. I'm going to be a sustainability consultant and help my partner, Dwayne of New Energy Homes, build one house to show people the new innovation. And all of a sudden, within 6 months later, I've got 3 lots to build houses on. I've got a building that needs to be renovated. And at that point in time, I owned 7 vacant lots, and I did not know how to do a spreadsheet. And I didn't think of myself as a small scale developer. I just thought myself as a guy who lived in a neighborhood, who had left the university and who had the privilege to have saved some money along the way and maybe could try to make a difference. At the time, back in October of 2016, Scott Ford was the economic director of South Bend and community director. He said, Mike, there's this group out there called the Incremental Development Alliance. And basically they help people to try to do small scale development in these neighborhoods that nobody else wants to develop. And so I went to their workshop, a day-long workshop in Flint, Michigan. And it was amazing. As an academic, I go to all kinds of conferences and I spend a lot of time just trying to get out of them because they just drive me nuts. You get so bored. But this was an amazing conference. It was one day long, several sessions. We learned a huge amount. Plus, we got to meet and network with other folks. And one of the people I met was Monty Anderson. Monty has been doing small scale development for 30 years in South Dallas, Texas, Duncanville. And quite frankly, it's been he's been the model that we've been, that sort of is the basis of small scale development. And they basically kind of really came to my rescue. I would not have known what I was doing. And so I became what I call the accidental developer. And what you can see right here is this is a aerial map of where I live. It's in where I'm working. It's in the near northwest neighborhood of South Bend. And what we call this our farm, because when we talk about development from a small scale development, from incremental development, we're not about going in and flipping houses and moving on. As a matter of fact, you probably can't do that because you couldn't get the appraisals right away. What we're about is farming. You find your area, your farm, and you commit to it for the rest of your life because you're focusing not on building buildings, but you're focused on building community and building neighborhoods. And what you can see right here is this is that area right now that this has now got 5 houses on it, new houses, and we still have 2 that we're going to be putting here, but the Habitat houses are right here now. This is where the first building that we renovated, and this is the second building that we renovated. Turns out now we've got 2 new tiny houses going up right here. You can see that these areas of lots that I purchased along the way, these vacant lots that we picked up, and some here, here, and here. The thing is, this is my farm. This is that coffee house that we talked about, we met. That's where I live. And so this is my farm. In about 2002, about 2 years into this, so I started in 2016, about 2018, I was looking around and now because things had continued to go along, I had not only the 3 vacant lots, that we were working with Habitat, and the Habitat houses were going up. We had done the old flower shop. I was getting ready to work on that second building and I had 20 vacant lots. I was going with my wife every summer. We go over to Europe. She was born in Berlin, and we have friends and family in Vienna. And I was sitting in my favorite Viennese coffee shop, thinking about what was going on, and actually had some time to kind of sit back and take a look at it. And what I realized is that we weren't just doing a house here or a house there. We were doing what I called a sustainable neighborhood development demonstration project that we now call Portage Midtown, because it's halfway between the ex-urban area on Portage Avenue and downtown, and we're about 15 minutes away from the University of Notre Dame. And so all of a sudden we began to realize that what we were really doing was we were building this sustainable neighborhood and trying to bring together the different sorts of components of sustainability and different elements that sort of come together nicely, thinking about green building techniques, thinking about complete streets, thinking about edible landscaping, thinking about missing middle housing, thinking about using a net zero building structure, and other sorts of elements that we could bring together. Strong towns, new urbanism. All of these sort of elements were components that contribute to what we are trying to accomplish. But along the way, there were some pitfalls that, had I known about them, I'm not sure I ever got into this. What got me going was, we just started. But then once we started, you had to keep going. One of the things that when we first tried to build out that first component, that little triangle that I told you had the vacant lots, in order to put 5 houses, eventually 7 houses, back where 7 houses used to exist, just to put those back, we needed 36 variances, and it cost us $12,000 to get that done. Now, it turns out, and what I learned from Incremental Development Alliance when I was there, was that this is not unique. Around the country, when you go into these neighborhoods, very often the zoning is based on county zoning, and it was made after World War II. And so it was sort of more for suburbs. And so the setbacks on the sides and the front, sometimes you're allowed by right to build maybe a house that would be 40 feet long and 10 feet wide. And so we were fortunate enough to get the city of South Bend to invite the incremental development folks to come in and help them understand this. So they eventually began to change the zoning codes so that we would be able to do something better by right. But to begin with, this is one of the things we discovered. And then the appraisers came. That house that building I bought up there, we call Share Space 909 right now. It's got a apartment above, and it's got a bike garage in the back and some cooperative working space down below. By the time we got done with it, total cost was $180,000. It appraised at $150. $30,000, $25,000, $30,000 less than we had in it. And we could only get an 85% loan to value. So we got 136 loan. So we left, some $25,000, $30,000 behind it. One of those houses that the Habitat bought, the actual cost to build that was $147,000. It only appraised at $122,000. So once again, an appraisal gap. So we've got this need for dealing with the variance issues. We've got appraisal gaps. And then what I call the elephant in the farm. Right in the middle of all of this, across the street from that share space, that flower shop, and across the street from those 5 new Habitat homes is this. This was originally the Ward Bakery building. It was built in 1920s and then expanded in the 1940s. And it was the home of things like Tip Top Bread. They eventually became part of Hostess. There was 13 of these buildings around the country. And it had been abandoned in 2012 and just sitting there. And it was bringing down the property values and destroying the entire neighborhood, for a few blocks around, right in the middle of our farm. And we were working with the NNN because, they were trying to get tax credit grants where they would be able to get a tax credit, to be able to turn this into affordable housing. And they tried for 6 years. And each time they'd try to, improve it a little bit to get more points to get the tax credit grant. But each time the price went up. So by the time we were going for the last tax credit grant about 2 years ago, they were up to $7 or $8 million, and it fell through. So now we've also got this kind of sitting in the middle. Well, it turns out we had to take that on too. So we have purchased this building, and we're now in the process of trying to renovate it. So what have I learned along the way? Well, one of the definitions of insanity, often misattributed to Einstein, but I think it's a good definition, is that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I think some of the things we learned is that if we're going to make these neighborhoods work, and we're going to do this in a way that is sustainable from a triple bottom line perspective, that means not only ecologically friendly, but also socially inclusive and responsible and economically sound, we really need to begin to think in a much more innovative and not just sort of incrementally innovative, but transformatively innovative fashions. And so some of the keys we think to creating vibrant, sustainable communities are some innovations that we've been able to sort of bring together. These innovations are a framework for sustainability, the approach of incremental development, the employment of a new high-performance building system, a focus on missing middle housing, redefining affordability, and focusing on placemaking. But key to all of this is putting the neighborhood or the community first. as a sustainability professional, when I started in 2008, I was looking for some kind of a framework that one could use as a foundation to kind of know what is or what isn't sustainability, and how can you work on this in a kind of distributed and step-by-step fashion. And that's when I ran into the natural step, the framework for strategic sustainable development. And what I liked about that framework is it was not judgmental and it was not pejorative. If you're a sustainable professional, sometimes you walk into a room and people will be hiding their styrofoam cup, or coming around into you and bragging about how they always use carry their own carry bags, and they've changed out all light bulbs to LEDs now. But what I was looking for was not a list, because once you've done the easy things, what do you do next? What we need is a framework that allows us to sort of take a look at what is our current context, what is our current situation, what is our current budget, and what can we take is the next step. And step by step, you can begin to move forward. And this is the framework that allows us to do that. These are just basic system conditions that have to do with reducing our metals, minerals, and fossil fuels, reducing the man-made community, and eventually eliminating the man-made chemicals, social chemicals that we create, reducing and eventually eliminating our contributions to the ongoing physical degradation of nature, and reducing and eventually eliminating our contributions to conditions that systematically undermine people's abilities to meet their own needs. And this framework was developed in the early 1990s in collaboration with groups like IKEA, Nike, Starbucks, Electrolux vacuum cleaners, the Scandic Hotel Group. All these folks have actually worked with this framework. Interface Carpet was one of the early adopters, and they've been able to fundamentally transform what they do to be much more sustainable and move along on that journey. And so that's been the framework from what I taught, and it's also the framework we use for our neighborhood development. Then there was the Incremental Development Alliance. And what was sort of interesting about this is when I was working with the framework for sustainability, it was kind of, do it one step at a time and do it in a distributed way. You're not doing it all yourself. You're teaching as many other people to begin to do this themselves. Well, the Incremental Development Alliance was doing the same thing, trying to cultivate 1,000 small developers in neighborhoods and cities around the country. Because one of the secrets is that in these neighborhoods, these middle neighborhoods between the downtown and the ex-urban areas, the cavalry's not coming. The folks who got the cash and the money aren't coming. And quite frankly, we probably don't want them because they're coming in to make their money and leave. We want the people within these neighborhoods to be empowered to develop their own neighborhoods and strengthen them up, ideally in a way that's not only socially responsible and inclusive, but also in ways that are ecologically friendly, but also, most importantly, economically sound. In doing those neighborhoods, what we're looking to do is we're looking to kind of right-size our residents so we build what we need, and we sort of focus on maintaining economic diversity. And in some sense, this is kind of like back to the future, right? This is what our neighborhoods used to look like. It was not uncommon if you would go into a block on one of our neighborhoods, you would find that the banker, the bank president, the bank teller, the janitor, could all live on the same block. Teachers and cops could live in our neighborhoods, and so could lawyers. And there would be commercial nodes along the way that folks could walk to in order to get, basically what they needed, what we would call missing middle housing. And so one of the things we've been doing is thinking about how can we build out missing middle housing using net zero high performance designs in walkable neighborhoods. And the way to do that, quite frankly, is one step at a time. You start where you can. If you're in a neighborhood that has got a appraisal gap, maybe what you're starting by doing is creating an extra residence or renovating something into a duplex or adding an ADU, because the deal is, while I would have been losing money if I had tried to build and then sell and flip those buildings that I was doing, I am making enough money off the rents for each one of them that we are covering our taxes, our insurance, our debt service, and providing a little extra. And each time we do one, we're slowly getting ourselves back to stabilization where we're going to be able to afford to pay for what we can build, which is our goal in our farm. the net zero building system is a different way of building. It's not a stick-built system. Quite frankly, if you were trying to do sustainable building, the last thing you would do is put a couple, of 2x4s, or now aluminum 2x4s every 16 inches. That's a conductor with only a 4 or maybe a 6-inch pocket. That doesn't give you enough space. With our post and frame development system, we're able to put a 4x6 post every 8 feet. And then if you see that, we've got a double dense insulation right there. But what we like to say is what makes a difference in our system is nothing. This gap here, a 2-inch gap on either side, it's like the vacuum bottle that many of you might have on your desk right now that is keeping your coffee warm for the next couple of hours. So our system stops the 3 forms of energy transfer: conduction, convection, and radiance. We also think if we're going to start to talk about affordability, we need to redefine affordability. One of the ways, and this is an innovation in itself, one of the ways affordability has been defined, is what is the upfront cost? And maybe what we do is we try to minimize the upfront cost by perhaps using a little bit less expensive materials, using that stick-built framework, and then perhaps getting a subsidy through a CDC, where the federal government will give some money. You build a house for $180,000 to $220,000, and you sell it to somebody who's at 80% of median income for $120,000. So you bring that cost down, or you do it through Habitat, where you help bring the cost down by getting them through sweat equity. But the problem is let's talk about the life cycle. Let's talk about, when are you going to get hit with the new roofing job because you use asphalt shingles? If you're using vinyl windows, how long are those going to last? If you're using vinyl siding, what's that going to look like 12, 15 years from now? Our system is not only energy efficient, but we're using metal roofs. We're using a smart siding that, if you get it pre-painted, has a 25-year no-fade guarantee. And most importantly, our energy costs are basically, over the course of a year, a hookup fee. So redefining affordability would suggest that what we want to do is, if we're going to help people who are at 80% of median income get into a house, we also want to do it in such a way that they're not going to get hit with unsupportable operating costs, or down the line, maybe before that mortgage is paid off, some major roofing, repainting, or window replacement costs. And then finally, we have to begin to sort of think about and transform how we think about place. One of the things, as I said, when people would talk about my neighborhood, the near Northwest neighborhood, they would go, yuck. And I actually had the experience about 3 years ago. I went to the Niles, which is a little city north of our place, about 8 miles. And we were talking to the director of community economic development. And she says, well, where are you doing your work? And I said, in the near Northwest. And she said, yuck. She knew somebody who lived here. And quite frankly, I said, I think it's a great neighborhood, but I lived here, I walked here, I understood it. But I could also see that when somebody was driving down that street, looking on the other side and seeing these junky yards full of trash and these buildings that weren't, renovated, how they'd feel that way. So one of the things that we did right off the bat is we began to try to transform how our neighborhood looked by various types of placemaking. And this right here is what we call the birthday chair. I put this up 2 years ago. It cost us just over $2,000. It's a 16-foot tall Adirondack chair that has right here a little height meter. So kids can come and stand on it, and on their birthdays, they can come and take their pictures. And now what happens is when people come to the neighborhood, this is now a destination. People actually come to our neighborhood that folks used to say yuck, to sit on that chair and take their pictures. And there's folks there every day. I had a woman there that came in. It was like she had graduated and grown up in this neighborhood. She came by because she was back for a graduation or a class reunion, and she wanted to come by and see here and get her picture taken. So if we take a look at our farm today and tomorrow, what you can see is this is where I lived. This is the area that we're working with. And these colored pictures are properties that we're either going to develop or own. These are what we start out with, the Habitat stuff there, the flower shop and the shop beside it. We renovated a rental here. We're in the middle of phase 2. This is that bakery building. We're starting to work on that right now. We've got a new roof on it and we're starting to get it cleaned up. Plus, we also are collaborating with N&M. They're going to be putting up a duplex here, a single family house here, and a fourplex here. And our 2 tiny houses are going up here. And then eventually we'll move on and deal with some of these other lots with some multifamily here. This is property that is currently owned by the city. We own these properties out here. Now, if we're thinking about We've been trying to be ecologically friendly. We've been trying to be socially inclusive. What about economically sound? Well, here's the power of small scale development, where you start with where you're at and you look at where you're at. When we were starting in 2016, basically our property taxes that we were being paid on all of the lots that we were building on or the city owned was $2,800. We are now up to $5,600. And by the time this year is over, we'll be paying a taxes of $12,478. But if you take a look at this, what you'll see is we continue to move on with Portage Place, which we're calling the bakery, and we get that back online, and we build out these other lots with some duplexes, townhouses, multifamily. We project by 2029 or 30, we'll be now presenting or providing $310,000 worth of tax revenue to the city, with approximately $15.6 million, $2 million of private investment. And not only are we sort of harboring private investment, but we're also able to do this by providing rent ranges between $900 or even less. Sometimes some of our tiny houses would be like $850, up to $1,775. So some of our stuff, even unsubsidized, is going to be something that will be affordable to somebody at 80% of median income. In addition, we're providing or creating 50 new residential units. We project up to 172 jobs, adding new commercial opportunities for people to work in the neighborhood, and having a lot of minority and woman available businesses that are owned to this. So this is kind of the process. And one of the ways I began to think about this is, as I began to start with my focus on sustainability, we were talking about sort of that idea of distributed impact, that, it's not what one person can do to follow that sustainability using those basic principles, but it's what 2, 4, 8, keep on doing it. Not only do we have companies like Nike and IKEA and Electrolux have been following this, but also Portland was one of the first cities to adopt this. Madison, Wisconsin, the nation of Sweden was where this idea was founded. All these places are places, if we're in the sustainability space, we know our leaders. And it's because they began to start one step at a time with a clear foundation or framework. But it turns out the same thing happens with small scale development. We've got people who have literally started on a street with tents that were rented out to start a market, and then trailers, and then a renovation. And Monty, our founder, started with tents 12 to 15 years ago in his farm down in Duncanville, and he's now living in a 12-plex above 5 commercial spaces, but it took 15 years. And it takes a lot of folks. So here in South Bend, what we're doing in Michiana is we're developing an ecosystem. So it's not just me, but we've got 10 or 12 developers that we're working with and 120 or 130 people to support it. So you need to create a strong ecosystem to support your farm. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of stop the share and open it up for any kinds of questions that we can talk about for the rest of this talk. So I don't know if people want to ask questions, people want to throw some things in the chat. We can do it however you want.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I'm really glad that you're here. We talked before, and just like when we were talking before, you covered so much content. We were frantically trying to write like thoughtful questions, but then you go to the next content and it sparked something else in my mind, and I was just like trying to keep up. But I do have some questions, actually, and we do have some in the chat as well. So thank you for being here. One of the Actually, I'm gonna turn it to Chris, who has a question.
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking was, like, this is awesome. It's so thoughtful. I love what you're doing in South Bend. But as an Indianapolis member, how can I get started? What's one thing I can do in my community to kind of support initiatives like this in my area? I don't know if you have an answer for that, if you know of different things I can do, but
yeah, I do have an answer for that. And actually it's two things. Number one, I'm happy to talk to anybody, first time, no cost. So you can contact me and I can have a conversation. We can talk one-on-one. But quite frankly, one of the things I would recommend for most folks is two things. If you're kind of thinking about that sustainability framework, go to the naturalstep.org, international or Canada, and there you can learn about the framework, and you can do anything, that will follow one of those principles. Many of us are already doing more. You can do more. But more importantly, when it's thinking about in the city and working in these neighborhoods and how we deal with this, I really turn people on to the Incremental Development Alliance, because I now work with them, and I'm also one of their faculty members. And I can send to anybody a 1-hour talk from Monty that sort of gives an overview. And then if you sort of get more into it, we have workshops on a regular basis that begin to talk about how this works. And then if you decide you actually want to get started, you can begin to do a boot camp. But what I've found that has really been important is that beginning to find people like you and just trying to do something. The most important thing that we've found is being project-based, starting something. For example, when I was starting the Center for Sustainable Future, I was sitting in an abandoned house that the campus used as offices, but nobody wanted it. So I took it. Now I had an office. And I started by talking and taking every phone call I could. And quite frankly, it was, I talked to all kinds of folks who, some of them knew what they're doing, some of them they didn't. But during the time I was there, I met a woman who wanted to help feed people, and she created something called Unity Gardens. In 2008, she started with a single garden in the middle of the city. And she just went there, no water. She took water in 50-gallon jugs, and she planted some seeds. And people said, well, Sarah, if you go do that, they're going to steal your food. She said, no, they can't steal my food because it's free. That's the whole idea. And they said, Sarah, they're going to kick your ass. Well, it turns out she'd been there for about 2.5 to 3 months. If you touched one of Sarah's hairs, they'd kick your ass because she recognized she was doing something. Well, what happened is in year 2, 12 other people joined her with gardens. In year 3, it was up to 30 or 40. And now, 10 years later, they're just finishing a $250,000 center where they can teach people how to grow their own food, how to cook that food on a 2-acre spot where anybody can come and pick food. And that's just because Sarah started. For me, what it was, I'd say, what did I start with? I started out with a tube of caulk. That flower shop you saw there, it was a mess. And I brought in guys. We first of all tore it all out. I did that. And then I brought in some guys to do the drywall. They did a crappy job. So I had to go in there, and I know how to caulk now. But that tube of caulk is how we are going to change how America builds, because that's what my partner and I's goal is. Our goal is to change how America builds so that we build up to 3 stories, commercial, mixed use, and residential, single family, multifamily, using a high performance building system that produces as much energy as it uses. But how am I going to make that happen? Well, I've got to get a house down there. Well, how can I get a house down there that people are actually going to rent or buy? I've got to clean up the neighborhood. So every one of us can start with a garden box, a tube of caulk, a renovation, a tiny house in your backyard, a conversation with some other people that you know who say, we can do this.
Awesome. Yeah, I love those stories, especially the grassroots ones where it's like started with one garden and now it's an entire complex. And yeah, that's awesome.
These definitely feel like they're moments of momentum. But like, have you run into any what's it take to spark that initial go up and get them? Is it just take really just you find someone who has an idea and it just takes encouragement and pushing them to do the thing, then eventually it snowballs into South Bend snowballs. It's fine. Anyway, and it snowballs into this great project, activating that initial push. How does that?
What it takes is you need to find folks who have passion, hustle, resilience, and a sense of humor. And like I said, I will talk to anybody, one time for nothing. And usually when I talk to them, I make an assignment, and usually that assignment is for them to do something that helps themselves, not that's helping me or not that we're working together. For example, I had an architect I was wanting to talk to. Oh, Mike, I'd like to do what you do. Well, the architect had not yet got his AIA. And so I said, you know what? You go get your AIA and then you call me back. And if you do that, Then we put together an assignment that we work on something that's a little bit together. And then if they actually do that, then we can really start. Well, this person never went and got their AIA. So that person didn't come back. I talked to a woman who was wanting to renovate a couple of houses. She was doing it. This was Barbara Turner, man. She's working her butt off, but she's doing it with credit cards. And she's just, $20, $30, $40, maybe $100, $200 a month. There was another woman over on our west side, underserviced neighborhood. And basically what she's doing is she's borrowing money from her sister to get materials that she puts in a house until she gets enough to put it together. So, when I talk to them, I say, okay, your deal is I want you to go and establish a bank account and let's put together a budget of what you spent and what you need. Man, she gets it done. I say, okay, let's go and will you watch the talk from Monty? She gets it done. Okay, let's get you into the workshop. Then we keep on going. So it's really about finding those people who have the passion to hustle and then giving them assignments to sort of show that they can take the next step. Because you see what happens is once you take a couple of steps, you start hitting holes or you start running into walls. And if you got passion and hustle, that's how you learn. It's problem-based and problem-driven. If I had known all this, I might not have gotten to it, but I might kind of, because I sort of learned over the years, I've been around long enough that the way I make something happen is create a problem. And then as you go to solve that problem, new problems come up and you keep on doing it. And you look back 3 or 4 years and you say, oh my gosh. And people look at you sometimes, they say, how could you do that? You must be a genius. No, I just got started and I just put one step in front of the next. And so the most important thing, again, is get people to start to do something. We say dream big. Dwayne and I want to try and change how America builds. I want to help create a sustainable future. Start small, a renovation, a garden, a birthday chair. A laughing bench. I've got a laughing bench around the corner from my birthday chair. Dwayne had an old, it was a bench with a trellis on top of it. Well, when I was growing up, my grandmother had in the backyard a bench. We'd sit on it with a trellis on it, and she'd say, this is my laughing bench. And you can't sit here and look at your eyes for me for more than 30 seconds and not laugh. And we would laugh like crazy every time. So when I saw that bench, I remembered that. And about 2.5 years ago, we put it on one of our other vacant lots with a sign that said that. People go sit on that. A vacant lot that folks used to go by and feel and didn't want to walk by. Now they walk to it, they sit there and they laugh. $800 if you don't have it yourself, you can do it for less than $800. Tell me what neighborhood can't get 10, 20 people together, no matter what their situation is, and raise that to put that out there and begin to make a difference. If you want to make a difference and do something in Indianapolis, get 4 or 5 people together. If you're a professional on here, you can afford 2 of you to put it together, put a laughing bench in one of your neighborhoods and get some folks together and start to smile at each other.
We're going to see those pop up all over the city for sure. Yeah, folks listening, if you've got that passion, reach out to Mike and get started. That sounds awesome. We've got one more question in the chat from Jordan Ryan. Do you see ways historic preservation can complement sustainable development? It's a really good question.
Absolutely. Particularly, first of all, we know that embodied energy, the embodied energy in the existing building is fantastic. And so I think being able to think thoughtfully about historic preservation makes a lot of sense. But I also think you have to approach that, just like sustainability, you have to approach that with balance. When I approach people with sustainability, I don't walk into a room and say, oh, turn the lights on because it's off because you're burning energy, or you got to be recycling, and tell people you got to be perfect. You cannot let the perfect be the enemy of good. We've spent a lot of time in our neighborhood rehabbing historic houses for folks, and then selling to them at 80% of median income. But now it turns out that we also live in a neighborhood that has the highest level of concentration in the blood of children in the country. And that's because the problem with all these whole historic houses is if you don't completely strip them of all their lead, the dust that comes from the windows going up and down and things like that can cause problems. So in some cases, historic preservation doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think in some of those cases, if we don't have the money to completely strip out a house, some of that doesn't make sense. But a building like that old ward building there, that's a whole different matter. We're going to have to replace all the windows there anyways. You can't build a building like that these days. We couldn't afford to do something. So I really think that historic preservation can be an absolute key. And again, a place to start when we're trying to build this sense. Because the other thing about historic preservation is it's a natural sense of place. That bakery is a wonderful place. It's got a bad history in some ways because they secretly put all the artisanal bakers out of business so they could come in and sell their bread that they claimed the beautiful thing was it was never touched by a human hand. But in order for that to happen, they had to get rid of all of the nutrients in the wheat and had one of the first laboratories in the country in their bakery to put the nutrients back in. And they helped destroy the American food system and artisanal baking. Part of my goal is to get an artisanal baker back in there where, you know what, your bread is made by a human hand. And we're going to put up a story of that called the Hall of Shame that takes a look and says, this is what people did, to help industrialize and denutrient our whole food system. And now we're back trying to build a sustainable one, because you want to know what? Those bakers that they put out of business, that was sustainable, small business people using local ingredients and selling local food.
Absolutely. I am aflutter with ideas. Now the energy to do this.
Yes, that's right.
That was excellent. I do believe that we have to wrap this one up. We have a little bit of a break coming before our next speaker. Dude, Mike, thank you so much.
Yeah, seriously.
This was phenomenal.
Yeah, no, that was great. Awesome talk. And again, any last words, Mike, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, the most important thing is people to get started. You can get a hold of me. You can Google my Thrive Michiana, contact me. There's probably contact information through IndyDesign. We love working with folks. Take a look at that framework for strategic sustainability and go look on the incremental development website, and then just do something. I'd love to see laughing benches with a little bit of flowers around them around the state. Let's make us the state of the laughing bench.